votes of the member. The San Diego pension system's attorney has verified that that provision can be used to modify vested benefits. It is a unique aspect of the city of San Diego that's unlike any other pension system in the state of California. So Mr. Geary would walk into court and say, Hail Mary pass, I'm going to challenge it all, reverse it all in one fell swoop. No. Judge Goldsmith has pursued a very thoughtful approach of putting in place a variety of reforms that the mayor and council have the legal ability to implement. All those reforms should be seen as a tapestry to reform and restructure our pension system to get it down to sustainable levels. And that is not addressed by Proposition D. Prop D may set up a 401k, but does not require any target of migration from the old system into the new. That's just one example. Offsets, employee contributions. Mr. Gloria will still not pay his fair share for his politician's pension. The largest subsidy is reserved for politicians. They get the sweetest formula as well. Prop D does not require that. It keeps in place a subsidy. Prop D does not require that union employees pay their fair share. It says we will reduce the subsidy, but not eliminate it. No, we need to have a pension reform plan that absolutely works and pencils out, not just provides some window dressing of reform. She voted to put it on the ballot. She voted. I don't know if she's taken a position on yes or no, but she voted to put it on the ballot because she felt that the voters ultimately should make a decision on that. And that's something that I respect. I respect her vote on the issue to let the public decide.
I think her vote was driven by the fact that our options are extremely limited. And I think there's without a doubt, even if you voted or did not vote for Sherry Leitner, you know that she cares about this neighborhood. She dedicated years of her life before joining the council to try and improve this community. I think she knows what $72 million worth of cuts will do to your neighborhood. I think that's why she wanted to put it on the ballot.
Yes, sir.
First, thanks for coming. But when I hear a lot of this on both sides, I feel like a lot of the comments are dancing around the structural edges of what we're really talking about. What I mean is, we've got the structural deficit, and I really worry that in 5 years, San Diego's a patient, it's a very sick patient. It's not enough to be bankrupt, but it's in really bad shape. And I'm hearing that, okay, we've got to reduce our costs or we've got to have more revenue coming in. But at the end of the day, what my real concern is if this were to pass, in 5 years, we still are not a very healthy patient. So what I'd like to ask both of you, Todd, I'd like to say, when you say we've reduced 1,600 positions, and 1,400 of them are vacant, we didn't do much. So what can we do to cut a lot deeper? And then I'd like to ask Carl to respond and say, okay, I can understand that we may not want to give money to a group that's not using it as well as we could. But if we can get much further, is it appropriate to look at some of the revenue sources? I've got a chance to work in a lot of cities throughout the state, and some of them are very, very healthy. Those aren't. But it seems like everything I'm hearing, we're not going to emerge 5 years from now super strong. We're going to limp out of it. So can maybe each of you answer those questions?
Sure. I think you were asking me what happens. Well, what more can we do to reduce costs? Is that
D or no D? It seems like
a
lot more we can do on the cost.
Well, I think the idea. Remember how I explained this. Proposition D is a temporary tax in exchange for permanent reform. It's an acknowledgement that there are more savings that can be achieved. The problem with most of those savings is the savings, when you really get into big dollar amounts, are in the out years. I mentioned to you that we have a new pension system that's less expensive than the one you're most familiar with. It will take a number of years to realize that because you have to have people enter the system and then retire from it, correct? The other thing, managed competition. We are taking an approach where we want to be very deliberate about this. The city, as you know, has not had a great history when it comes to contracting. You look at the charter's ticket guarantee or the debris clearing contracts after 2007. We want to be judicious about it as we start to put out critical government services for bid. So it's going to take a few years to run all those through and then, again, to realize the savings over time. The reason why D is so necessary is that as those savings are achieved in the long term, we still have this problem in the short term. It's driven not just by the cost of government in San Diego, but by the dysfunction in Sacramento and by the ailing national economy. So that's why we need the temporary tax and the permanent reform kicks in, and combined, we can make sure that our quality of life in San Diego is maintained. That's what the goal is. That's the plan.
I think your question is very thoughtful, and it's the right question for us to have a civic dialogue on. I will tell you this. I have looked through every nook and cranny of this budget. I've looked at ways that we can save money, ways that we can benchmark to other departments around the country using best management practices. And I will tell you right now, if I thought we needed a tax increase to balance the budget and provide for our core neighborhood services for our quality of life, I would tell you tonight. And I tell you, we do not. You do not need to raise your taxes. What we need to do is we need to restructure how our city government operates, starting with the pension system. Let me give it in perspective. Pension. Cost for retirement benefits this year alone. Cost just for retirement benefits. Set aside all the other fringe benefits, like health care for current city workers, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, personal leave. Set aside all the other fringe benefits. Cost for retirement benefits this year alone, $370 million, or 69% of the entire city payroll, just for retirement costs. You cannot sustain that. You can't sustain that. In the real world, the percentage for retirement benefits is around 18 to 20%. We are 3 times that. So do I think 3 times a third of $370 million, would that open a lot of fire stations? Would that pave a lot of roads? Would that balance the budget, pay down debt? You bet it would, and you know that that number is indefensible and unsustainable. And then that's even before, that's just pension reform. Let's now talk about managed competition, new business practices, streamlining efficiencies, core services, the landfill. The landfill, we have opportunities to figure out how we get out of the business of managing our landfill. And people will pay us money for that asset. Redevelopment monies. We ought to have the redevelopment fund, now that Sacramento has chosen for us that we ought to spend all this money in the redevelopment area. Let's require that they pay for Petco Park debt service. Let's require that they pick up the cost of the convention center. Right there, that's $30 million in general fund expenditures that could be covered by the redevelopment agency. And then there's still billions more for stadiums if you want it. So I am not going to stand up here and say, don't raise taxes, or we're never going to need a tax increase, if I can't look you in the eye and say, I've looked through every nook and cranny. And I'm telling you right now, if you insist on reform, if we manage city government in an accountable and efficient way, you don't need to pay more for these services. These services, you already are paying your fair share in tax burden to your local government, and you ought to demand the services that you already paid for.
Sir, did you have a question?
Yes. I don't understand all the discussion about Proposition D. When the grand jury reported we were $6 billion in obligations, liabilities, and debt. $6 billion. That's 9 zeros. So if we save 300,000 or 400 or 300 million, it can't possibly be done. Over the next 5 years, we have to contribute to the pension fund $1.5 billion in the next 5 years. Where's that money coming from? In 2035, 2025, we are putting in $350